This is the story of Joe Bugbrain's first day on the job. And last. Of course, he's a fictitious character. He has to be with a name like Joe Bugbrain. And this is a fictional story. No American worker is foolish enough to commit over 36 safety violations in one day. Several, maybe, but dozens, no. And anyone who did would end the day in a hospital or the morgue, if he wasn't fired first. Industrial carelessness cost industry and workers around $30 billion a year. Accidents cause about 2 million injuries every year. They kill about 10,000 workers every year. And many of these victims are innocent. They are victims of other workers' carelessness. Here's what's true about our story. If you obey rules of safety, you can have a long, healthy, and rewarding career. If you don't obey them, at least one of these things will happen to you. You'll be hurt or killed, you'll lose the respect of your coworkers, or you'll be fired. Well, here's Joe getting ready for his first day of work. He complains that the safety shoes issued to him are uncomfortable, too stiff. So he's putting on some old shoes of his own. Very foolish. Safety shoes protect the feet with their reinforced toes and their metatarsal guard. If Joe would wear his safety shoes, they'd be broken in within a couple of days. They'd be as comfortable as his old shoes and a whole lot safer. Uh-oh. Now he's putting his safety glasses into his pocket. But he's not taking off his ring. He's got it mixed up. He should wear the glasses and take off the ring. Safety glasses protect you from flying pieces of metal, wood, rock, concrete, or other material which could put out your eye. Rings seem to have a way of always finding themselves between hammers and the tools being struck. Fingers have been lost because rings cut off the circulation to swollen, smashed hands. And if a machine is electrically alive, your ring can create an arc and actually weld you to it, an interesting experience. If you told Joe he was thick-headed, he'd take it as an insult. But only a thickhead would scorn the use of his hard hat. Joe's thick head surely doesn't impress his foreman. But the foreman has no idea yet just how dumb Joe Bugbrain is. Of course, first impressions tell a lot, and Joe's starting out on the wrong foot. At least Joe's a willing worker. Look at him work that forklift. Well, he may be willing, but he's also sloppy and careless. Carrying a pallet that far out on the forks is dangerous. Not only can lifting a load like that damage the forks, but it also changes the center of gravity, which could cause the fork truck to tip over. Always make sure that the load is placed all the way back on the forks and properly supported. If the load is unbalanced, special care must be used for a safe and controlled lift. And when you're stacking pallets, you should always know the maximum number of pallets that may be placed on top of one another. This number varies, and it will usually be marked on the sides of the boxes being stacked. If it's not, ask your supervisor. And never drive around with a load in a raised position. He's forgotten something important, though. Those forks can cause serious injury when they're left in a raised position or sticking out into an aisleway. It's a good thing this fellow's alert and conscientious. He knows that the forks can be lowered even when the engine's off, and he makes sure the area is clear before he lowers them. Now Joe finishes off the job. But lifting heavy cartons that way could finish off his back or his stomach muscles. He should lift with his legs like his coworker. Then he'd be less likely to hurt his back or get a hernia or have cartons drop on his unprotected feet. And less likely to cause his foreman to worry about him. This is a very dangerous little tool. See those edges jutting out at the top? They can break off like shrapnel from a hand grenade and put out an eye. Well, finally. But when there's a real strong chance of flying debris, you should wear special protective goggles or a grinding shield, not ordinary safety glasses. And a job like this calls for work gloves. Fortunately, a co-worker warns Joe about mushroom tools and tells him to dress up the chisel first. Now let's watch Joe flirt with death or very serious injury as he chooses the wrong tool for the job. First, he selects a tool that's been tagged. A tag tool should never be used. There's something wrong with it, and it needs to be fixed. He's risking a rude shock, an electric one, by using a tool without a ground. As a general rule, every power plug should have 3 prongs. The third prong is a ground. If the plug doesn't have 3 prongs, don't use it. The only exceptions are some of the newer, largely plastic power tools. Although such tools are less durable, double insulated tools are insulated by the plastic, so they don't need a ground. His coworker really is a nice person, although Joe may not feel that way. That's better. However, for the best protection, a ground fault circuit interrupter is recommended whenever using electrical tools. Even when properly grounded, a power tool can short out or malfunction. If this one does, Joe has no room to get out of the way. This portable grinder doesn't care what it grinds, metal, wood, or flesh. It's a spirited tool that likes to lurch out of control when it encounters a sharp change in the plane of the surface it's grinding. And it should never be used without proper eye protection. You can imagine how Joe's coworkers are beginning to react to him. Joe's gotten the word. For a job like this, use a bench grinder. Joe often does the right thing, but at the wrong time. Now is not the time for work gloves. They can easily get caught in a piece of machinery. Now he's using the right tool, but the wrong way. And Joe's still not wearing proper eye protection. That protective shield should be tilted down, Otherwise, it's not protective at all. Joe obviously needs all the protection he can get. His sloppy housekeeping is a further danger to him. He could slip on a tool like that. This tool doesn't even belong in the workplace, let alone on the floor. Adjustable wrenches can lose their grip. Use a box wrench or an open-end wrench. Luckily for Joe, he seems to have completed this job without hurting himself or someone else. All he has to do is unplug the grinder. Of course, he forgets, and someone has to tell him that idle power tools should be unplugged. But you should never unplug something by pulling on the cord. Always take hold of the plug, like this. Because it's his first day on the job, Joe is naturally curious about the other work that's done here. In this instance, too curious. A welder wears that special protective shield for a purpose. Without it, staring at a welding flash is like staring at the sun. And as you get closer, it gets even worse. It might be interesting now, but by tomorrow, Joe will probably see things differently. Joe has worked hard and is taking a break, but that puddle could take a break, too, of Joe's ankle or leg. Fortunately for Joe, it was a shallow puddle. You can't gauge the depth of a puddle just by glancing at it. If Joe had stepped in this puddle, he would have gotten hurt. Walk around puddles and always be alert for any unmarked tripping hazards. Joe has picked a poor place to enjoy a breather. One of those steel frames could fall on him. Always steer clear of piles or stacks of heavy material that could fall down on you. And never smoke around oil drums or other flammable material. Break's over, but Joe will soon be back. His carelessness is about to start a fire. If Joe knew where the fire extinguishers were located, he'd be a lot more help. He's found one, but because he hadn't familiarized himself with their types, he's chosen the wrong kind for a wood fire. Always check out the fire extinguishers in your workplace so that you know where they are and which is which. And if you arrive at the scene of trouble but aren't really needed, stay out of the way. No one has had time to notice that stray ember right next to Joe's foot. Luckily for Joe, his coworker used his head and reacted quickly. If your clothes catch fire when the proper type of extinguisher is not available, roll over on the ground. The ground will suffocate the fire. Fortunately for Joe, his coworkers, and the company, help arrived with the right kind of extinguishers. But it won't do any good next time if Joe puts it back where it was. It's empty. Never put a spent fire extinguisher back in its place. Ask your supervisor where to take it for refilling. Well, he did it anyway. Never rehang an empty extinguisher. Of course, knowing Joe, he's probably more concerned with changing his barbecued pants. Now let's see how Joe fouls up his next assignment. He's been asked to take these cylinders to another location. They're properly secured, so he has to untie them first. Cylinders should always be secured to a strong stationary object, as these are. Bottles should be rolled in the upright position. They should never be lifted. Joe always seems to make work harder rather than easier for himself. A bottle cart would provide better protection for the bottle, Joe's feet, and his back. These cylinders can explode. They should never be handled roughly. They should never be laid on their side. And a cylinder whose pressure regulator has been removed should always be capped. And, not surprisingly, Joe forgot to secure the cylinders. Joe is sure getting known around his new workplace, known as the man nobody else wants to work with. The foreman's noticed him, too. The day's nearly over, but Joe has time to botch one more job, repairing that flashing. But he may never reach the flashing because he hasn't inspected the ladder. If a ladder laid like this will bear your weight, it should also bear your weight when it's upright. And check for splinters, for cracked, missing, or loose rungs. Joe's ladder happens to be sound, but not when placed like that. When you place a ladder, always follow this simple rule. The distance from the base of the wall to the base of the ladder should be roughly 1/4 the working length of the ladder. For example, if the working length is 20 feet, the base of the ladder should be 5 feet from the base of the wall. Climbing a ladder that's not secured at the top is risky. Joe should have asked someone to hold the ladder for him while he climbed up and secured it. Well, this time he was lucky. Here comes some help. The foreman has something to say to Joe, but he wants him to secure the ladder first. Joe shouldn't leave that toolbox on the roof ledge either. Joe is clearly a dangerous man, a liability to his company, his co-workers, and himself. The foreman is doing his job. He's also doing Joe a favor. He's firing Joe before Joe hurts or kills himself or someone else. And just in time. In real life, of course, Joe wouldn't have lasted even this long. He'd be one of those statistics we showed you at the beginning. He'd be hurt or dead. So, although Joe doesn't understand it, our story has a happy ending. Joe Bugbrain is still alive and healthy. But for his own sake and ours, let's hope he can find a nice, safe office job somewhere.